All right, good afternoon, everyone. Kate Bora here, author of Core Confidence. Super excited to be here and chatting with you live. It's been an interesting week for Fiona and I, who will be joining me soon, hopefully. We were having some tech issues, always lots of fun. This week, the Workplace Gender Equality Agency has come out and released their data. So every year around this time, November, WGEA come out and release the data set. And so we're now 5 years of recording and sharing that data. So it's interesting in terms of, every year. I think there's some great messages. What we're seeing is slow but consistent progress. Last night, actually, I listened to a podcast with it's Jane Caro and let me Fiona now. Jane Caro, Catherine Fox, a Women with Clout. I was listening to it last night, and it was an interview with Libby Haythey.
Hi, Kate.
I was just saying, you mentioned yesterday the Women with Clout podcast. So last night on the way home, I listened to the interview with Libby Lyons, which was amazing. So, yeah, really great to hear more about Libby's backstory. But she was talking about, obviously, the results of the 2017-18 scorecard and, areas that we're making progress and perhaps areas that are a little bit slow. So, there's been lots in the media this week around, obviously, those results. And I was just saying, Fee, we've been in doing Core Confidence Lunch and Learns. And one of the things that I love the most about those sessions is very much the whole piece of every time I'm in there, we have conversations with people that bring new light to the subject, create new distinctions, new things that we can come and talk to people about on the Facebook Lives. And today, we're going to be talking about core confidence when the stakes are high.
Hi, Kate. Yes, it's been a delightful week full of events and meeting new people, talking about core confidence and just hearing, everyone's story, really. I think that's probably one of the things that surprised me is we did know it was an issue, but everybody has some story they can relate to around confidence and when it's been present, but also, when it hasn't been there for them and what that's meant or how that's got in the way of them doing things. And I think one of the events we were at, the STEM piece at Vodafone midweek, and, the first thing that the panelists started talking about too, very successful women, done great jobs, academia, entrepreneurs, corporate roles, and straight away the confidence piece was in the room. It was, one of the first things that happened. So we're really, it's great reinforcement that this is a really important thing and people need an opportunity to talk about it and bring up what's going on for them and what's happening and how we might be able to address that in a constructive and useful way.
Yeah, and I think some of the key repeated things that we heard this week from panelists to people in the room in Core Confidence Lunch and Learns, this whole piece of distance and experience reinforces the message that in any experience you will learn something and you will get information, and all information is good information to lead you towards or away from something that you don't want. So I think, and that it won't always work out. And I heard that, listening to the podcast, the name of the podcast is Women with Clout. Awesome. Some really great, Catherine and Jane are amazing anyway. On their own, I could listen to them for hours, but they've got some great guests. But just the piece that, have a go. Things won't, it's not always all going to work out, and you'll learn from something and you'll keep moving on and being persistent and keep moving forward. And I think we're not going to talk about it today, but really what comes up then is this whole piece around fear. And it's fear that's holding us back. And I think the more that, you can really, and I guess if we think about the subject of core confidence when the stakes are high, often it's a heightened sense of fear of what will people think of me, what will happen to me if something goes wrong, will I be fired? Like, they're the kind of stakes, like if the stakes are high, it's some pretty serious stuff going on, or that you think might be going on, which I think is a key distinction here, because often the stakes in our mindset might be different to the stakes in the mindsets of possibly our stakeholders.
Yes, yeah. I think as we were coming to this topic today, I was reflecting on, it's so easy to get caught in the drama or what's going on, as you say, in your head, and the story you've made up in terms of what's at stake, what's happening, and why it's so important. And it's almost like that feeds into less confidence. So I suddenly, you know, because of this context, because this many important people are in the room, or I've got to deliver something that, you know, it has to be super accurate, or whatever the story is you've got running, you've loaded up all of the expectations on yourself and what you think other people are requiring of you. And you've already made it, you know, almost too big and too difficult. So it's no wonder that sometimes we get in the room in these situations and it feels almost overwhelming, and we start to become tongue-tied, you know, that lizard brain kicks in, fight or flight or freeze, where we're sort of lost in our own stuff rather than confidently and calmly being able to share what it is we know. Because what, you know, our experience is that 98% of the time you've got it. It's just, can you stay in a good frame of mind and a good grounded sense of, I can communicate this well. I don't need to go into all that drama and story around it.
Yeah, I guess what came up for me is, can I stay in good contact with everything in my brain, right? I shared yesterday, I can be in rooms and things come out of my mouth and I have no idea where they've come from, except I know I read it somewhere, or it's something, and that's been a beautiful reinforcement of the value of reading articles, books, staying really across content on the basis that if I do that, I know that it's in here. I may not consciously recall it in a moment when I say, oh, I read that book and it said X, Y, Z. So I may not have that conscious competence to recall it, but often when it's appropriate, some of these things will come out. And it's very much, you know, we talk about staying in good contact. It's very much around, how do I do that? And to your point, you know, keeping the pathway open to our executive or higher functioning brain, where all of that really good stuff is there. And it's for us to be able to stay in good contact and recall from there. And trusting in the moment. You know, I shared this week, I was on stage a couple of years ago, 1,000 people in the room, and I was doing a 20-minute keynote. So typically with a 20-minute keynote, you do frame it up pretty much, or script it pretty much, so that you make sure that you are covering everything that you need to. And I remember being on stage and literally going, I have no idea what slide is next or what I'm supposed to say next. And literally, like, my brain was blank. And so I held that moment, took a big deep breath, kept kind of managing my breath. And sure enough, it dropped in and I clicked to the next slide and then kept talking. So I segued and kept going. But I remember in that moment, I was like, I've got a choice to freak out or just stay really centered and trust that it will pop in. So I think there's a really big piece. And you know, like anything we talk about, it's small steps, right? It's practicing that trusting that you've got the information, and so that side's the preparation, and then it's the presentation, or the presence. Who are you when you're in the room? I think if we talk about preparing for high stakes conversations or meetings or presentations, one is what's the preparation, and then is how do you show up? Who are you showing up as? And obviously, you know, our piece is authenticity. Grounded and present is super important, so that you can stay in good contact with that preparation, because all the preparation can come out the window if you go into fight or flight and the brain locks down.
Yes, yeah, there's this lovely piece about who you're being in the moment, and I think your example illustrates that perfectly, that, you know, we really, if we slow it down enough, we always have a choice. And there always is this moment where I can take that breath. And even though to you, you'll feel like when you first start doing this, you'll feel like there's no time at all. I've got to do something. I've got to, you know, fix this situation because I'm worried that I don't know what's going on or what needs to be said next. But if you can just slow down, and as we always say with this, practice in smaller situations first. So when it's not such a high stakes meeting, trust yourself to just breathe through for, you know, even just that taking one breath will, you know, reopen that pathway to the information that's already in your brain. But as soon as you freeze up, you just won't have that. So it's practicing and using and getting used to the fact that that resource is available to you, And as you said, it's how you show up, who you're being in the moment, that will allow you to access your core confidence no matter what's happening externally or how difficult it might feel as though the moment is, you'll still be okay. And I'm encouraged when I hear people saying, oh, I you know, it didn't feel comfortable, but I made my way through it, or I was prepared to try, or I did take that breath, or I did look to someone that I knew was a supporter and they kind of reassured me with their eyes, and then I could keep going. There's lots of little ways that you can make sure that you don't go into that freezing or flight sort of sense of things.
Yeah, I love that tip. You know, have some supporters in the room who are giving you feedback, because, you know, again, I know particularly when I've gone into rooms which are, I'm going to say, typically cold, as in I don't have existing relationships in that. If you can at least, you know, if you've got one person who's actively nodding and really engaged, paying attention, it helps you just have that barometer of where do I adjust? You know, do I go deeper? Do I go lighter? Is this landing well? You know, you can also kind of ask questions and get them doing things. Often the volume of interaction, if they're kind of talking to the person next to them, and actually even hooking into one of those conversations and listening and being part of that can be useful, just to get a sense of where things are in at the room. But I think, yeah, absolutely. How do you create some key messages? And ideally, I mean, if we're thinking about in your own workplace, often you will have supporters in the room of people who can kind of just, you know, ask great questions or really provide live feedback so that you can adapt within the moment, for sure. So I think there's, you know, we're not going to talk really much around the preparation, because I think most people have got that nailed. In fact, probably most people overdo that, in my experience. I think probably the piece that people haven't done well, or people don't tend to do, is, have I prepared what I will do if I get asked something that I can't respond to? And so what happens is we stay in this state of, I hope I don't get asked a question. Oh my gosh, I hope I prepared everything. So we stay in this kind of treadmill state, and rather than going, okay, cool, so if I do get asked a question, how will I respond? So I'm really comfortable with the language, which might be something like, you know, I actually haven't thought about that. Or it's not something I've explored in particular detail. Is there something, you know, you particularly want to share or explore around that? You know, actually prepare how you would respond to some of those situations that maybe are triggering the fear state, so that you have certainty around them. It's not going to make it super comfortable, but at least you have some certainty around, okay, cool, if that happens, this is going to be how I respond. And I want to caveat that with, this is not 10,000 scenarios that you are preparing for and having an answer to. It's making sure you've got a couple of ways to respond to questions you don't know, or if something goes in a direction that you're not comfortable with, you're able to navigate that in a way that keeps you really grounded, and doesn't have you go into the story and into fight or flight.
Yeah, I think sometimes when we over prepare, that's almost, we get ourselves into a state of agitation, because then our expectation is, I know this, and we're almost tightly holding on. How can I hold on to all my knowledge I have and remember all the things I need to remember? And we've wound ourselves up into, you know, I have to be the expert in the moment, or I have to be able to answer the questions. And that puts so much pressure on us. We haven't got space to just be present in the moment, to listen to the feedback and to interact. And the truth is, most situations, even if they are a presentation sort of thing, if there's questions being asked, there's always opportunity for dialogue. And rather than seeing it as a, I have to know, it's much more of a, what can we explore together? What could we find together if we examine this issue or this idea, or, you know, whatever it is? And sometimes it may even be, you know, oh, okay, well, thanks for that. That's a really good question, really interesting. I need to go away and do a little bit more research around that, or I need to go and speak to a couple of people and come back with some thoughts and ideas to respond to that. And again, no one's expecting you to know everything except yourself. That's usually the only person who's got that expectation. What they are expecting is that you are resourceful enough to know where to get information and how to respond to things, you know, or how to go and address the situation, even if you don't have all the information in front of you, but you will be able to deal with it in some useful way. So I think some of this is taking pressure off yourself. As soon as I think we started this saying, you know, as soon as we say the words high stakes, we get almost into a state of agitation. So how can you recalibrate that a bit to go, part of my brain thinks this is really high stakes, and maybe it is, that's a story that I've got going. But I know that immediately I start thinking that way, that's not that helpful. So how can I normalize this a bit and go, look, you know, this is part of professional life. This is what I have to do. So how can I stay connected to my really good inner resources and know that, as you said, being calm, being present, and knowing that there's actually nothing that's going to happen that's going to result in some catastrophe. Like it cannot be that bad. And I think sometimes when we get anxious, we go to catastrophizing, thinking about, you know, oh my God, as you said, you know, could you lose my job over this? Well, that's highly unlikely. So I think we've really got to bring that down and not get caught in the drama.
Yeah, I think that expectation piece is really, really crucial. You know, we see people tie themselves up in knots about this stuff all the time. And so, and I think, you know, even as you were talking about that response of, you know, it's a great question, I haven't thought about it. Probably not something I can cover in today's session, but, you know, I'll take it offline, and when we meet up next time, you know, let's talk further. That response in and of itself shows a confident person who, you know, isn't beating up on themselves, isn't putting unrealistic expectations on them. You know, I think there is something that happens in that moment when you respond that will either increase your currency or your reputation with the person who's asking you, or decrease. The person who kind of goes into freak out mode, you know, the person who's asked the question is probably going, oh, okay, well, they didn't handle that so well. So, you know, as compared to someone who's like, well, you know, don't know, let's go and have a look. So I think there's a whole piece around the way you respond will influence how people will react to you not knowing. And so the cooler you are with the fact that actually I don't expect myself to know, therefore you shouldn't expect myself to know, has them kind of going, oh, okay, yep, cool, no problem, move on. The minute we go into catastrophe and stress out mode, they're going to kind of almost orientate you, mirroring back that you should know. And therefore, you know, that will start to, I guess, resonate in terms of how they might be seeing you. So I think there is this whole piece of, no, I think even if you've checked in on expectations and maybe you should know the answer to the question, the cooler you can be about it, the better it is. And often we see this, you know, when people have so much on their plate that typically things have to drop down. So stuff that was super important last week and literally is at the bottom of the list this week because more important stuff has come, literally could get asked a question about those things. Then it's like, oh, you know what? Don't know, haven't had a chance to look at it. Yeah, probably, you know, it is part of my job description. I should be all over this. But the fact is I'm working on all these other things that are more important. So can't talk about that. And so, and I'm thinking about two particular people at the moment, clients at the moment who are in that space, and their reaction is, yeah, don't know. Kind of, it's so direct that everybody else around them goes, oh, okay, and moves on. So I think there's this whole piece around, it's so important how we hold our inner state and what's going on for us, because, you know, if you are freaking out, it is going to come across. And, you know, the tools to be able to stay in that really present, grounded space, you know, are around breathing. Of course, do your preparation, but to your point, the more that you try to memorize something, you know, in my experience, that has never worked well, because typically at some point in the verbatim script that you've memorized, you will drop out, you will forget something, you will get stuck, there will be a roadblock, and you will put so much pressure on yourself to remember where you're up to that literally that will put you into a cycle of spinning out and possibly unlikely to come back from that. So the advice I always give clients, particularly around things like presentations, is prepare, have notes. If you want to script it, script it. 2 hours beforehand, throw the notes away. Do not take the notes. When I say the notes, I mean the word for word notes. You might take some bullet points on a piece of paper. Do not take a script on stage with you or up to the front of the room, because if it's there, you're likely to crutch it and leverage it. And if you do happen to get stuck, you will dive straight for the safety net. And so if you don't have that there, you're forced to stay really present and have a conversation with the people in the room. And the reality is, if we're talking about presenting, communicating in a meeting, at a forum, it's a conversation. And so the more that you can converse and dialogue with the people in the room, stay present and connected with where they're at, the questions they have, and really use it as a back and forth conversation, the more that you can treat it like that, the easier it's going to be for you. It takes the complete pressure off you as an individual.
Yes, yeah, I think that piece about knowing what's expected in this situation, and as you say, many situations are actually more about how can we work on this together, how can we solve something together, and rather than, you know, thinking you have to be the authority, that, you know, often 2 or 3 heads around a problem are far better than one anyway, and the ideas and what you'll think of collectively are going to be far more powerful and useful. So dropping your expectation of your own, but also collaborating well and drawing on the understanding and knowledge of others is a really powerful way. And it also speaks to confidence. You know, it speaks, you know, when I'm kind of cool with, oh, I'm going to get other people's input and I'm going to synthesize something, we're going to figure it out together. That's a confident, practical person. That's someone who's actually able to deal with the challenges in the moment, as opposed to has to be rigidly prepared for something and can't cope if we go off script. So I really like that idea that, you know, treated it when it's appropriate, treat it as a dialogue, treat it as something where there's a to and fro.
Yeah, and I guess a great point to finish on. And I'm reminded of, you know, the final element of Core Confidence Express, which is curiosity. You know, the ability to learn rather than know. It says, you know what, I'm going in, and on some level, I'm expected to be the expert or the subject matter expert on this particular topic. But I'm not connected with the fact that I know everything. And I'm here to, and I guess it's a really good reminder to be really clear about what is expected of you, to know what you're there to do, and to question and clarify that. I think people don't do that enough. I'm there to, you know, I'm in the room to do what, to serve what purpose, to bring what level of expertise, and really orientate around that so you can make sure that you deliver on that. And what can be really useful is to context that at the beginning. So I'm here too, and then you deliver on that. But what you're doing is you're managing expectations of people in the room as well. And so you can then, if there is scope to move outside of that, that you can bring and invite other people in, or other dialogue in, or other questions in, to be able to round that out a little bit. But that's not on your shoulders. I mean, we see it all the time. Whenever we go in to present Core Confidence Lunch and Learns, and the sort of first 5 or 7 minutes that I'm talking, it might be longer sometimes, and then we go to the first share, where we get people to turn to the person next to them and talk a little bit around, you know, what does confidence mean to them. The energy in the room goes from almost like, it's not, tension's not the right word, but the energy in the room is kind of all eyes on one person, listening intently, and it's kind of like this intense energy. And then everyone starts talking and dialoguing, and the energy just totally, you know, just breaks and shifts. And it's I notice it every single time. It's more just that first sort of 15 minutes. And so the question is, how can you, you know, how can you move quickly from that intense energy? Because particularly with, and I said to you this week, Fiona, ultimately when you're presenting, you are being judged. You are up there saying, I've got an opinion. I've got something that I think is worth sharing and worth your time to listen to. And consciously or unconsciously, people are then going, yes, you have something worth listening to, or no, I don't like what you're saying, and you don't have anything worth listening to. And, you know, they're the two spectrums, and somewhere along the line, everyone's going to sit. So there is a level, particularly in those first, that first time frame of any presentation and interview, all of those sorts of things, those first initial questions in an interview, that energy can feel quite intense. And so it's how do we break it a little bit? And often it's getting dialogue from other people in the room, it's getting questions, it's getting feedback, whatever it is, so that it's not this intense radar energy coming at the person that's speaking, and with it a whole bunch of expectation and judgment.
Yes, no, as you said, we're going to wrap up, but I really like that reminder about staying curious. And actually, if you want to stay curious, which is an aspect of confidence, it keeps you out of, you know, your head a little bit, and it's kind of a little bit playful. It's a little bit dynamic. It means that you can be a catalyst for something new coming through. So hold a good, healthy curiosity as you go to do whatever it is. And the other piece about getting the clarity about stakeholder expectations or participant expectations, if you're walking into something, really know what you're there for and therefore what they're expecting from you. And as you say, context that so that, you know, there's not misalignment in the room. And you've just initially, you've taken a layer of pressure off in that, which is great, because that means we can stay calm, which is part of the whole thing about reducing it from that feeling of high stakes.
Cool. All right, guys. So encourage you, you know, we always talk about small acts of confidence. So look for opportunities that maybe aren't super high stakes, but, you know, sit in that middle level, and look for opportunities to start to practice this. Look for opportunities where, you know, you have prepared, but you're not cramming on your notes, that you start to build the feedback loop, that you can trust that everything is up here in the brain and will come and serve you when you need it. And really focus on, last Facebook Live we did was all on grounded, staying grounded. So go and check that one out. Some great tips in that around how to stay really grounded in the moment. And start to practice in small moments and build that feedback loop so that you can start to staircase your way to leveraging these techniques in high stakes conversations. So Fee, thanks for being here. As always, great to see you, and see you on the next Facebook Live.
Thanks, Kate. See you then.